Over the past year, the U.S. Supreme Court has passed a number of what you could call pro-conservative decisions. Among them was the overturning of Roe v. Wade, the rejection of Joe Biden's student loan forgiveness plan, as well as the striking down of affirmative action, which effectively made race-based admissions into college illegal. Now, those decisions, particularly the overturning of Roe v. Wade, have reinvigorated the Democrat-led push to quote-unquote rein in the U.S. Supreme Court. For instance, soon after the Roe v. Wade decision was leaked to the public, quite literally minutes after it was first published by Politico, the police had to set up a barricade surrounding the U.S. Supreme Court building because pro-abortion activists began to file in and protest. You had similar situations playing out with the other decisions as well. Furthermore, it's not just the rank-and-file young people who are out there protesting in front of the Supreme Court building and sometimes in front of the justices' homes. Many members of Congress have also come out with, you can say, some strong language opposing the current configuration of the court. Take a listen.
The Supreme Court is hearing arguments, as you know, for the first major abortion right cases since Justices Kavanaugh and Justices Gorsuch came to the bench. I want to tell you, Gorsuch, I want to tell you, Kavanaugh, you have released the whirlwind, and you will pay the price.
And besides just the strong language, Democrats at the federal level have also been attempting to use various legislative methods to actually take control of the U.S. Supreme Court. For instance, you might remember how 2 years ago, there were 4 congressional Democrats who introduced a bill to expand the U.S. Supreme Court and add 4 new justices. That particular bill was called the Judiciary Act of 2021, and it would have added 4 more justices to the bench. Now, you might be wondering, who would choose the justices? Well, naturally enough, according to the U.S. Constitution, it would be Joe Biden. Now, back when they introduced this proposal, many people argued this was an act of packing the U.S. Supreme Court. However, Jerry Nadler, a Democrat congressman from the state of New York, he had, you can say, a different take on it. Here's what he said, quote, "We are not packing the Supreme Court. We are unpacking it." Now, what he was referring to there is the fact that President Trump, during his term of office, was able to fill 3 Supreme Court seats, giving the conservative wing of the court a 6-3 majority. Likewise, here was how Senator Ed Markey, who is a Democrat from Massachusetts, here was how he described their proposal. Quote, "The only packing we need is that everyone watching this video pack those like and subscribe buttons." Now, I am of course just joking about that. However, if you do take a quick moment to smash those like and subscribe buttons, it'll force the YouTube algorithm to share this video as well as this content to ever more people. Now, getting back to it though, here is what Senator Ed Markey actually said regarding his proposal. Quote, "Republicans stole the court's majority, with Justice Amy Coney Barrett's confirmation completing their crime spree. This legislation will restore the court's balance and public standing and begin to repair the damage done to our judiciary and democracy." And of course, by restoring the balance, he likely means that if they were able to add 4 new justices under Joe Biden, then the court would go from 6-3 conservative over to 7-6 liberal. However, that proposal quickly faded away. That's because even within the Democrat Party, this was not taken too well. In fact, here was what Nancy Pelosi said on the matter back when she was still Speaker of the House. Quote, "I have no plans to bring it to the floor." However, even though she opposed that particular piece of legislation, Nancy Pelosi did voice her support for a commission that Joe Biden set up in order to study the possibility of changing the composition of the court. Here's what she went on to say, quote, "I don't know that that's a good idea or a bad idea. It's a big step. It's not out of the question. It has been done before in the history of our country a long time ago, and the growth of our country, the size of the country, the growth of our challenges in terms of the economy, etc., might necessitate such a thing." And indeed, just 3 short months after assuming the White House, Joe Biden issued something known as Executive Order 14023, in which he established what's known as the Presidential Commission on the Supreme Court of the United States. And among several other things, this commission was tasked with investigating the question of whether the number of justices on the U.S. Supreme Court should be increased. Now, eventually, after 180 days, that commission came out with a report. You can see it up on your screen. And within that report, the commission wrote that packing the court was a terrible idea, that it would destabilize and further politicize the court, hurting the very foundation of the rule of law in America. And as such, that line of attack on the court effectively stopped. Or rather, it didn't really stop, it just shifted away from packing the court to instead regulating the affairs of the justices on the court. For instance, in June of this year, meaning just 3 short months ago, right after the Supreme Court struck down Joe Biden's student loan forgiveness plan as being unconstitutional, Congressman Ro Khanna, as well as Don Beyer, both of them Democrats from California and Virginia, respectively, they together introduced something known as the Supreme Court Term Limits and Regular Appointments Act. This bill will effectively change what's written in the U.S. Constitution, and it would instead establish 18-year term limits for Supreme Court justices. For your reference, for the past 235 years in our country, Supreme Court justices have had lifetime appointments based on Article 3 of the U.S. Constitution. However, Congressman Ro Khanna said that it's time to change this. Quote, "Our founding fathers intended for lifetime appointments to ensure impartiality. The decision today," referring to the student loan forgiveness plan decision, "demonstrates how justices have become partisan and out of step with the American public." Likewise, you had Congressman Don Beyer, when speaking about this newly introduced proposal, say this, quote, "Recent partisan decisions by the Supreme Court that destroyed historic protections for reproductive rights, voting rights, and more have undermined public trust in the court." Now, for their part, U.S. Supreme Court justices are notoriously tight-lipped. They very seldom come out and issue public comments on current affairs. However, after nearly 3 years of this type of attack on the legitimacy of the court itself, well, Justice Amy Coney Barrett, she issued some rare comments while speaking at a judicial conference over in the state of Wisconsin. Specifically, she said that she welcomes public scrutiny of the court, but that because of the internet and because of social media, the public now knows the faces of the individual justices. And this spotlight, well, it makes it harder to work. Quote, "People just didn't recognize who the justices were before the internet. I think that's better. I don't think justices should be recognizable in that sense." And there is perhaps some truth to that comment, as evidenced by the fact that there were quite literally around-the-clock protests, including serious death threats at the homes of conservative Supreme Court justices for the past 2 years. However, Amy Coney Barrett went on to say that there are both good and bad sides to the U.S. Supreme Court being in the news so frequently as of late. Quote, "To the extent that it engages people in the work of the court and paying attention to the court and knowing what the courts do and what the Constitution has to say, that's a positive development. To the extent that it gives them misimpressions, that's a negative development." And it's worth mentioning that many of the misimpressions that she mentioned in this comment that people have about the work of the court are very likely due to the way that the mainstream media frames those particular decisions, such that the common person who already doesn't know much about the Constitution because it's not really taught in schools anymore, just assumes that Supreme Court justices are making decisions based exclusively on their own political beliefs, which is something that Amy Coney Barrett also addressed in her comments. Quote, "Judicial philosophies are not the same as political parties. To say that the court's reasoning is flawed is different from saying that the court is acting in a partisan manner. I think we need to evaluate what the court is doing on its own terms." Furthermore, in terms of the personal attacks being lobbied directly against her, Amy Coney Barrett simply said this, quote, "I have acquired a thick skin, and I think that's what other figures have to do. I think that's what all judges have to do." But the story gets a lot deeper, which we'll get into right after I introduce the sponsor of today's episode. That's right, this right here is MCT Wellness, and it is a phenomenal supplement from Gundry MD. In fact, this right here is the watermelon lemonade flavor. Now, Gundry MD is a company that was founded by Dr. Stephen Gundry, who is a cardiologist, a heart surgeon, and the director for the Center of Restorative Medicine. And through his many years of research, Dr. Gundry has gained deep insight into what it really takes to lose weight and to actually keep it off. In fact, he himself has lost over 70 pounds using his research, and he's been able to keep that weight off for well over 20 years now. Now, he calls his method caloric bypass, and according to him, it allows people to lose weight, to get a lot more energy, to improve their digestion, to have their joints and muscles feel stronger and better, and generally to lead an overall healthier life. And Dr. Gundry, he put together a video laying out all of his research, which you can watch over at thehealthyfat.com/Roman. His video, by the way, has been watched by over 20 million people so far, and in it, he teaches people exactly how he was able to lose weight and to keep it off. I'll also throw the link down into the description box below this video for your convenience. And she will likely have to maintain this thick skin moving forward, given the fact that in the upcoming session of the U.S. Supreme Court, they have a number of cases in front of them, which, depending on how they wind up ruling, have the potential to shake the administrative state in this country to its very core. Because you see, for many years now, administrative law was seen by most of the public as something very, very, very obscure and very far removed from their everyday lives, which naturally makes sense because administrative law covers things like the statutes, the rules, and the case law which govern how federal agencies over in Washington, D.C. structure themselves and conduct their everyday business. It's not a very titillating aspect of law. However, recently, more and more people have come to realize how large and powerful the administrative state actually has gotten. And secondly, they've realized how much impact it can have on the lives of everyday Americans. For instance, the recent student loan cancellation plan, the so-called Clean Power Plan, which would have shifted our entire power grid to be 100% renewable energy source based, and the recent decision by the ATF to ban certain gun components, which are technically legal. Well, these are all examples of how these federal agencies can make rules, not laws, mind you, they can make rules which affect our everyday lives. Just as an example, when the ATF passed that new rule saying that gun braces are now illegal, what they essentially did was overnight, they turned about 1 million law-abiding citizens of this country into criminals because they were in possession of these gun braces, which the agency now claimed were illegal. Now, mind you, absolutely no law was passed in Congress to make them illegal. It was just a federal rule from a federal agency. And it's exactly this type of power that unelected bureaucrats have over the common American people, as well as the American economy at large, that are now being challenged in 3 separate cases. For your reference, those 3 cases are Loper Bright Enterprises versus Raimondo, which has the potential to overturn the broad authority that federal agencies currently have to interpret ambiguous language in the law. Then there's another case called Securities and Exchange Commission versus Jarkessi, which has the potential to overturn the system wherein federal agencies can sue common citizens in an agency court with an administrative judge rather than an actual court of law with a real judge. And then there's another case called Consumer Financial Protection Bureau versus Community Financial Services Association of America, which has the potential to overturn this odd situation wherein certain federal agencies have become completely immune from congressional control. Now, each one of those 3 cases is very nuanced and particular, but taken as a whole, they represent a real opportunity by the U.S. Supreme Court to reel in the administrative state and take away power from these unelected bureaucrats. And as all those cases are going to be making their way through the court, you can be sure that we here at the Epoch Times will keep you abreast of any and all developments. Until then, if you'd like to read anything that we discussed in today's episode, including the comments from Amy Coney Barrett, as well as all these general attacks that the U.S. Supreme Court has been experiencing over the past 3 years, I'll throw the links to all my research notes down into the description box below this video for you to peruse at your own leisure. And then lastly, you might not know this, but on the very same day that Joe Biden was sworn into office, by some magical coincidence, on that very same day, YouTube made the decision to demonetize our channel. Since January 10th of 2021, we have not been able to run ads before, during, or after our program, and the Super Chat feature has mysteriously been disabled. Now, every few months, on the back end of our channel, I appeal that decision. And for the past 3 years, that appeal has always been rejected. And the system's reason for rejecting my appeal is that some channel associated with our account grossly violated YouTube's policy. Now, they never tell us which channel, which piece of content, and which policy. And furthermore, every single one of our channels receives that very same message, meaning that every channel gets denied monetization because the system claims one of the other channels violated a content policy. It's amazing how it all works. And so if you'd like to support the journalism that we do here at the Epoch Times, if you'd like to support our work and get access to an unfettered amount of awesome content, well, the best way is to subscribe. And in fact, the Epoch Times has recently extended their awesome sale, just 25 cents a week for a whole year, which, if you do the math, works itself out to just be a single $1 a month. And so if you've been on the fence about subscribing to the Epoch Times, but you know for sure that you're definitely looking for a source of honest news, well, perhaps take the sale as an opportunity to try the Epoch Times out for yourself. That way, not only can you access all the phenomenal content that we put out, including all the documentaries, all the videos, all the infographics, the deep analysis, the great newsletters, and all the great articles, but also, I myself publish somewhere between 1 to 3 exclusive episodes of Facts Matter over on Epoch TV. And so, if you'd like to watch some extra episodes of Facts Matter, including a huge backlog of episodes from the last 2 years, well, you can find it all over there. I'll throw a link to the sale page. It'll be right there at the top of the description box below. You can just click on that link and head on over and subscribe to the Epoch Times right away. You can, of course, cancel any time, but I'm sure you won't. I'm sure that you will love it. Again, that link is right there at the top of the description box below. Hope you check it out. And then until next time, I'm your host, Roman from the Epoch Times. Stay informed. Most importantly, stay free.